Hey, how you doing? So for this assignment, I thought I would just discuss the parts I pulled from all of the documents I read, and just kind of show what I got out of it because there was a lot of interesting information that I really wanted to just quote, and I felt like that was too much for a paper. So I thought I would talk about it. So on the first article with right here on the screen, the focus on autism and other disabilities, there's some interesting stuff in that. A lot of the stuff that got me were the tables. I found it interesting that most parents, if you look here, it's the 51% total, thought the social skills were really important. Now, if you take away from that the paper's on autism, I still find that quite interesting, that social would have been the highest. I would have thought education-wise, but I could see how that a parent during this time just wants their kid to be as normal as possible. What I also found interesting is that most people thought the school wasn't really doing the priorities they wanted as parents, which really made me think about what are the priorities parents have. The paper really didn't discuss that, it just kind of discussed more of how the parents feel, like in the comment sections, if that makes sense, where they put all the high parts, like all the social stuff they're doing, but then it's my kid, they don't just sit around all day, why aren't they really doing anything, that type of thing. So I found that interesting that they thought how low it was, that their thoughts are being reached. Which brought me to its ending points of how most kids are in the general education classroom all day, and parents are being communicated with all the time, but yet parents still feel like they're not being heard and what they want done isn't being done. So it kind of brings me more into what do parents want done. And something that's not on here is the paraprofessional I decided to interview was my brother Richard. He paraprofessionals at my mom's school. We both worked there. It's kind of nice. Great people. And my brother is in ERR part-time as well as PBI. He does both. And something interesting he always has to say when he comes home is just how all the kids just don't listen and all that. But when it comes to parents and some of the stuff I asked him about this, of like how would you talk with the parents and everything, is that the parents are mostly just like, well, as long as you're doing your job. But there's so much more to that. Or Richard, his biggest complaint, it was one of my complaints too, was that parents don't do what they need to do at home, and they expect the school just to fix their child. So that's why it brings the question of, well, what are these parents expecting out of it? What do these parents want done? And that's what makes me think about. So, kind of how I would deal with that based off of these facts from this article is I would kind of see what parents want and discuss with them if we're actually able to do something like that to help them feel like they're more involved, if that makes sense. Because sometimes I feel like the needs of the parents just can't be reached and they're not realistic. But it's trying to figure out how to say that correctly, which is the hard part. Going on to the other article right over here is Working Together for Students in Diverse Populations, Chapter 9. Oh, this is supposed to come down. So what I found really interesting is how it said to refer to families, so just having that cultural idea of just, it's guardians, not mothers, fathers, families, because you don't know. I also found it interesting how it states there's never been a diverse teacher population, which I totally don't disagree with. Most schools you go to, that's white women teaching your children. So I found that kind of interesting. And then, but what I really liked about this article is how it gave all these different ways, like developing cultural competencies, which you can do, increasing your knowledge, and all these just fun ways collaborating of how you can improve yourself. Because kind of what I got from it is that to be able to talk with families with cultural different backgrounds or paraeducators, the community, like Peregrine Elementary is highly Hispanic. There's a lot of migrant farm workers, which is a whole nother reason why I put who move frequently in this. Because to me, that's something I've worked with before that was important to me, is how do you deal with that? Because in my mom's classroom, she'd have students who would miss 3 months of the school year because they go back home to Mexico. Well, how do you deal with that? Where do you pick up from there? What can you do? And I found a lot of this interesting of just being aware of these things. Like my mom would plan packets to send home with these kids because it's something to do for one, and two, you're gone for 3 months, you're going to miss so much. At least maybe this will help keep you up so when you come back, it's not as bad. And I thought it was just interesting how this picked up on it, and that you need to know these things and how to test yourself to make sure you're learning this. I also really liked the tip section of just learning and asking. I feel like we live in a culture that's afraid to ask, and something I've learned, especially with my dad as a realtor, just don't be afraid to ask. And with one of my best friends coming out as bi, don't be afraid to ask. I would ask questions all the time, and so does my family. We're not trying to be rude, we just don't understand, and we want to understand, so I know what to do, what to say, how to react. For stuff like that, and I found that interesting. One of the other things in this that I didn't get to put in here was they had a whole portion on the LGBT community, and I thought that was pretty cool. Because I feel like it's not new, but it's now like being talked about type thing in the world. And I thought that was interesting how they put that in of different ways to speak to that. For my brother, he's just not afraid to ask in the schools, and the principal loves that about him. I also feel like that's a whole nother story with how your principal feels about that. And he'll just ask the special education teacher about the child's culture, about the child's family, just so he knows and can react. Like the young man he works with. He comes from a single mom who works all the time, and she's not home, and he has a major disability. And my brother, I love my brother, sorry, he didn't know that for the longest time, so my brother's the type of person who's hard on you. It's like, just get it done, come on. But once he realized that the kid doesn't have anyone ever cheering for him, my brother changed his whole entire attitude, and he started cheering for the kid, saying, hey, you're super smart, you got this, oh my gosh, look at you go. And just the difference in relationship they had, as well as the work and quality of things the kid did, changed completely, and I thought that was pretty cool. An interesting story of just knowing that things and how you can work better on it. The next part was the International Journal of Disability Development and Education. This is one I went out and found. Oh, no, sorry, this is one of yours still. And what I found really interesting in this is just all the parent rights that were in it. And like, parents have the right to this, but this is how they feel. Is that families feel like, yeah, it says in law I'm supposed to know these things, and I'm supposed to do these things, and all of that, but when it comes down to it, they don't feel like they're part of this thing. They don't feel like they're involved, which really amazed me, especially since a lot of the teachers I learned from, because CWI, a lot of their special ed teachers are actually out in the field teaching during the day, and they teach these classes at night. And something they always told me was how much parent involvement there is. Parent involvement, you always want to involve the parents. And just to read these and see like parents don't actually feel like that, it kind of like took me back for a moment. So it's like trying to figure out ways to make sure they feel involved and that they're happy and that they realize these are things I can do. Which is something like maybe what I could do is have like a list of these are the things that are musts for the parents. How can I somehow incorporate these in? And these are my musts. How can we come to a conclusion, if that makes sense? Moving on to the Idaho Special Education Manual. I kind of did a quick search on keywords of family, parents, etc. And I kind of come across a lot of definitions like native language, and most of the stuff in there said like it has to be in their native language. So knowing these things, how to help, where to find stuff for this was huge. So it kind of made me think like, should I just have a website where my paraprofessional eyes can go to that has like English to Spanish variations, all the different documents I need that are in the different languages, stuff like that, so it's quick, simple, get it done. I also found it interesting they have both guardianship and parent. Until I read them, I didn't realize the differences in the meanings. So I found that kind of interesting, but I couldn't believe how long this parent definition is. That kind of blew me away. I found that interesting, but it covers all different types of parenting, which also blew my mind because there's just so much out there to know and so many toes not to try to step on. That's why I have this big attitude of don't be afraid to ask, otherwise how are you supposed to know? It's all in how you ask too. Then, oops, come on. So then this is the website I found, Reform Support Network Strategies for Community Engagement and School Turnout. It was a government website. And I found it really interesting. They just gave a lot of stuff of how to get communities involved and how you can help a community get involved with the school. Little things like community gardens were a big deal. To me, of course, with my dad being a realtor, what I'm comparing this to, because to me, a lot of special education is talking with people. And the biggest thing I learned who to talk from is my dad, because he talks to people in real estate all the time. And how you talk about these things, what you do, because you learn a lot of people's secrets in real estate. Holy cow, that's like a whole nother conversation we could have for hours. And the biggest thing I learned when trying to deal with community and people is just knowing somebody. It's who you know. So having somebody you know in different things like personal care providers, a mental hospital, vocational rehab, like the ones you had on the rubric, just knowing somebody there who you can just call if you have a question and be like, hey, XYZ, what do I do for this? Or, hey, I have this kid, what do you think we could do? Just having those options and knowing who to call, which brings me back to that website of like a know-it-all website is what I'm thinking about. Just that kind of way to get into the community, so you have people to turn to who can help you out, and that also like when a student graduates, maybe a list of people like, hey, if you need help, these are people you could talk to. I don't know, it's just a lot of my brain going on about that. So, and then my reflection, of course, which I kind of put in throughout, as well as my interview with my brother. He also had some interesting thoughts on just don't be afraid to ask, talk to the kids, talk to the families, and as long as you're polite and friendly, they're going to be polite and friendly as best they can. And you have to remember, which was the biggest thing, my mom is a 5th grade teacher, my dad is a realtor, my brother a paraprofessional, and anybody else I really met in this world, because I have a lot of entrepreneurs in my family, is just respect the person and realize the shoes they're in. Like, as a special ed teacher, I'm working with somebody's kids. I have to remember that. They're going to be feisty. They're going to be mean. And sometimes the mama bear is going to come at me because it's somebody's child. It's their biggest possession in the world. And I have to remember that. And it all comes down to what's going to be best for the child. How can we all come together for that? I'm at 12 minutes. It's 15-minute max. But that's kind of what I got from all the articles, and those are kind of my conclusions, and my biggest takeaway just being don't be afraid to ask, have respect, and remember that you're dealing with somebody's child. And with talking with families, community personnel, and for paraeducators, just be that friend, but also boss mentality is what I got from my brother. Thanks so much for listening. I hope I did this correctly. And thanks for a great semester. I hope I see you in Moscow in the fall. Bye!